Welcome to another exciting episode of The Capitolist, the show that makes public policy discussion slightly less boring through the power of song.
Real Floridians of genius!
Slightly less boring, but still painful to watch.
Is your headset unplugged? Did you unplug it on purpose to make sure you couldn't hear me singing?
Yeah.
Never mind. We got too much to cover.
Okay.
Let's start off with Congressman Ron DeSantis. Right. DeSantis is Richard Corcoran's worst nightmare. Both men are doing some saber rattling, and you know what that means? Saber rattling?
Saber rattling?
It's an older expression, but it's like, the whole I'm gonna make war. I'm threatening you with.
Well, you're a
war.
Star Wars fan. I know that.
Don't start on that.
I thought maybe it was.
Don't start. Saturday night, no spoilers. No one should spoil me about Star Wars. I've got a week to go. Anyway, both of those guys are talking about running for governor in 2018. Here's what we know about the state of the race. DeSantis has now signed a couple of political consulting firms, and some big contributions are starting to accumulate in a state-level political action committee that is aligned with him. So far this year, Ron DeSantis has collected $2.1 million in that political action committee.
But that's not a lot of money in a governor's race. It just isn't.
It's not. It's not a bad chunk of money before you get into a governor's race, but it's pretty late, and especially since Richard Corcoran has raised about $4.5 billion this year.
And then there's Adam Putnam.
Right. He's got $11 million in his PAC, and he's got millions more that have been given to him directly into his campaign fund.
And at this point, these other guys are running out of time, right?
It's getting late in the game. They're cutting it very close, and a statewide television buy on broadcast TV, for example, costs millions of dollars. Right. So not even Adam Putnam can afford to buy his way to victory. He's got a huge financial advantage, though, and because he's been a declared candidate for months, he's got an organizational advantage, too. So unless a very wealthy and respectable candidate gets into the race, the nomination is still Adam Putnam's to lose.
But on the Democratic side, that is wide open.
I think so. I think it is. It really is. There's polling out there that shows Bob Graham's daughter, Gwen Graham, and Andrew Gillum are in a dead heat, but polls at this early stage are good for two things. One, getting donors who know little about politics to write you a check, and two, crumpling it into a ball and tossing it in a trash can. The latest poll has Bob Graham's daughter, Gwen Graham, at 24%, and as yet unindicted Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum at 17%.
And may never be indicted, I would like to point out.
Yes, well, and that's not really a dead heat. I think right. the Bob Graham's daughter folks. I tried to say Gwam.
No, I can't say it. Gwen.
Yes. Just call her Bob Graham's daughter and everything will be fine.
I'm going to call her Gwen Graham.
But guess who the front runner in that poll is?
Undecided?
You're smart. Correct. I thought you were going to guess Miami Beach Mayor Phil Levine. He's raising some big money.
He's raising some big money on the Democratic side.
Millions of dollars.
Right.
And he's probably the front runner for the Democrats because he's got the ability to tap into financial resources that his opponents just can't touch. The good news for Florida, though, is that Phil Levine is pretty far to the left.
You think that's good news?
Of course I do, because I think it's easy to beat a left-leaning... A candidate that's too far to the left, I think, is very easy to beat, especially in Florida here. I think voters are not likely to support a candidate that is a true liberal.
I think you're giving voters way too much credit, or maybe underestimating them.
Yes, maybe. And speaking of giving voters too much credit, you've been paying attention to the Constitutional Revision Commission, right?
No.
But you know about it, right? I mean...
Yeah, I do.
Most people have no idea what's going on.
Right.
Every 20 years, Florida sets up a Constitution Revision Commission appointed by the governor, the House Speaker, Senate President, and the Supreme Court Chief Justice. It's like 37-some people who are basically unelected.
Except for one. There's one elected person.
I'll take your word for it.
Bondi's on there.
You're 100% sure?
Positive. Just looked at the list.
Okay. So it's mostly unelected.
Correct.
Maybe she'll be our salvation. She's a conservative attorney general. She knows the law. Maybe she'll be. But the bottom line is they all are considering a bunch of crazy proposals that eventually could make it onto the November ballot. Now, they're not all crazy, but I think there's a lot of submissions that come from all over the state. And this body of 37 people decide which ones make it onto the November ballot.
Which sounds dangerous.
Where these voters decide their fate. And that's very dangerous. So
but it's direct democracy.
Anytime you give them that much power, it's a scary time. But yeah, I hate direct democracy. Wow. I hate it. I'm sorry. I don't trust the average voter to put in the amount of research necessary to make a sound decision about issues that could have a profound impact on the state. I mean, if you put something on the Constitutional Revision Commission, it's not coming off for another 20 years.
It would have to
unless you have another ballot initiative, and that costs a lot of money. You have to get it's just
It's a
huge, huge thing. So bottom line is, it bothers me. And they're not simple laws that can be tweaked. So they're just not that easy to change if we accidentally vote something bad into the state constitution.
So what has you worried? What in particular is on
There's
there
an
right
environmental
now?
proposal, for example, that gives everyone the right to clean air. Now,
Sounds great.
it sounds wonderful, right? And what voter? That's the problem, if you ask me. What voter is going to vote against it? I mean, in reality, it's a vague proposal that would allow people to fill out or file all sorts of silly lawsuits over violations of their rights to clean air. But who decides what clean air is? I mean, is it like, dirty air?
I live with a bunch of men and boys.
Dusty air?
Right.
Smoky air? Foul smelling air? You're violating my right.
Right.
If you eat that kimchi stuff, you're violating my right to clean air. Anyway, we don't need all these rights. The U.S. Constitution already gives us the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are some pretty broad rights. If some evil corporation is polluting our air with noxious gas, in addition to all sorts of other laws they're probably violating, we don't need a state-level amendment to address that problem. I just see a lot of silly lawsuits coming from it, and I think that it's a bad amendment, so we don't need more of that in our lives. So, anyway.
Speaking of lawsuits.
I'm getting there. I'm getting to there.
Okay.
So, the Jack Latvala.
The Jack Latvala saga continues.
Yes, lawsuits and complaints are flying in the Jack Latvala sexual harassment story. We had several new developments. Things took an ugly turn last week when Latvala's defense team, either accidentally or on purpose...
You think it was on purpose, just...
I do.
Own it.
I was okay. I could be wrong, though.
Right.
Either way, they revealed the identity of his accuser. And then one of Latvala's defenders sued the accuser for defamation. A number of senators on both sides of the aisle have called for Latvala to step down. And in perhaps the most significant development, Senator Lauren Book filed a new complaint against Latvala, accusing him of violating the Senate's rules by identifying and bullying his accuser.
Things are looking really grim for the senator.
They are. And before I tell you what I think of all this, we're going to talk to a couple of Tallahassee's very well-connected insiders. Communications professional Ron Sachs and government affairs expert Katie Webb, both to find out what they think Latvala's chances are.
And we're going to ask them how the situation will impact Tallahassee's capital, the culture here, in years to come.
Right. It's a good conversation. We're going to have a great conversation with these two. And if you remind me, I'll ask them that question.
Yes. That was my reminder. That's kind of why I threw that out there just now.
Okay, great. I forgot the other thing I was going to say.
So you only have your brain has room for just one thought at a time?
What?
Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and toss it a break. We'll be right back.